Hi guys, it's Khalil,
Hey, it's Chad.
and we are the Marshals of Truth. All right, so for any of you that have seen the last two episodes on that mini series we just had about the about us answering the question of whether or not the nukes dropped on Japan in 1945 were justified, we thought that we would continue that theme of nuclear weapons in a series that Chad suggested a little while ago about nuclear deterrence. Um, and with that, there will be a lot of introduction to Cold War and post Cold War, like age of new concepts and in a new world. Um, and the first of which will be on the general topic of nuclear deterrence. We don't know how many episodes this will take. Um, like, and really, with any of these series, we really have no idea. But I'm thinking, just a guess, maybe five or six. And just so you know, Chad and I, a little while ago, we decided that we were going to change the length of each video because we recognize that for those of you that are still catching on and still watching each episode, thank you. But yeah, like we're releasing hour-long episodes, and we recognize that that may be a bit of a turnoff to some people, which is a shame because the topics that we talk about in each video are very interesting. I think we both agree are very interesting, and we would like to engage as many people as possible without having to change the topics that we discuss. So rather than the alternative, we're going to shorten each video to a cap of 30 minutes instead of 60 minutes, which therefore means that there will be more videos now. We're just going to release two episodes every 3 days instead of just one.
Yep, we're going to be experimenting with that. We'll see how you all like it. Be sure to kind of comment on it. But we think it'll be easier to digest. Probably will keep us from going on for way too long, too. But yeah, we hope you guys like them. Ready to begin? So yeah. So the topic of this series really is about nuclear deterrence. So of course, you're going to ask yourself, what is nuclear deterrence? So, post World War II, nuclear weapons are a thing. The US, of course, had them, and by 1945, the Soviet Union did, and then other countries.
49, right?
40. Did I say 45?
Yeah, I think you meant
49. My bad. Yeah, after 49, the Soviet Union had them, and then later on, France, the United Kingdom, and more countries would get nuclear weapons. And so, of course, warfighters would have the question on how would we fight war with these nuclear weapons and how war itself would be fought when the whole concept of a weapon that could wipe cities off a map is common and we have thousands of these weapons. And so we'd come up with the idea of nuclear deterrence. So, nuclear deterrence, in brief, and we'll go a lot more in depth on it, is the idea that you could stop a war or you could stop the enemy from wanting to fight you because you have the capabilities in your nuclear weapons to destroy them completely, and not just destroy them completely, but you yourself would also be destroyed in a nuclear conflict to the point that fighting that war is not really worth it. This will come into the idea of mutually assured destruction, or MAD, which I'll get into a little bit. But I'd like to introduce, what nuclear deterrence looks like. And so to start out, I'll be using the United States as an example, because now I believe we have the second most nuclear weapons in the world behind Russia. And we have a fairly sizable and fairly modern nuclear fighting force. So I'm going to be using them as an example. Yeah,
oh oh yeah, I can't
oh,
screen share.
oh yeah. Little technical difficulties always happen here and there.
All right. All right, cool. So yeah, keep going where you were going about the US as an example of nuclear deterrence. That's the reason for this photo right here.
Yeah. So with the United States nuclear arsenal, we have what we call as a nuclear triad. So what this basically is three different areas or concentrations of our nuclear weapons that each provide their own advantages and disadvantages. So the first of those is our ground-based nuclear weapons, and these come in the form of intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs. You've heard the word all the time. And so the United States has currently 400 Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missiles, which could reach just about anywhere across the world. And so we have these missiles based in Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota, and then F.E. Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming. We used to have more based around that kind of area, but they're all concentrated in these three kind of areas. So the advantages with these nuclear weapons is that they're always ready. So with a ICBM in a silo, it's just waiting there. It's fully fueled. The weapons that we use solid-based propellant, which doesn't have to be loaded. It could be stored in for hundreds of years sometimes. And so it's ready at basically a moment's notice. They could be launched within 5 minutes of getting the order. So with this level, it's always ready. And it's decently survivable. So we keep these in silos. These are usually hardened to survive a nuclear attack or two. It's likely, though, in any sort of nuclear exchange, they would be saturated with various different nuclear weapons and rendered inoperable. And so in that case, they would usually these weapons would be launched off, and that would be about it. And so be launched on pretty early in the conflict so that the silos can't be destroyed and any missiles waiting can't be rendered inoperable. So this is one of the three kind of main areas that the United States keeps as weapons. And as I said, the advantages were the quick response time and the decent survivability. But the disadvantages of this level of the triad is that their locations are known. As I said, anyone could go on Google Maps and look up these Air Force bases and see the silos that they're there. It's the same thing for Russia. It's the same thing for China. And so people know where these silos are, and they're going to be targeted. And so when it comes to deterrent, while they're very quick and able to be responded, they're likely to be the first, if not the second ones targeted in a nuclear exchange. Yeah, so we could go on to the next slide. Cool. So the second part of our nuclear triad is our air-based systems. And so these come in the form of air-launched cruise missiles, so basically little cruise missiles that come out of bombers and go seek their targets, and then gravity bombs, literally just bombs. And so we have about 540 of I believe they're called B-61 gravity bombs. So these are the ones that you see in the picture to your left. These will be deployed out of bombers such as the B-52, the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, as well as previously the B-1 bomber. And then with the B-61, they could also be based out of fighter jets and tactical forces. But the big advantage with the ground-based nuclear deterrent is that they could be forwardly deployed. So the United States has nuclear weapons we have an agreement with NATO in different NATO countries that we could base nuclear weapons in their nation. So we have a deal that we could hold weapons with France, the United Kingdom, Germany, Belgium, Italy, the Netherlands, and Turkey. France and the United Kingdom already have nuclear weapons, but with NATO we are able to hold these nuclear weapons there, and so whenever we need them, they're already closer to their targets. With silo-based, they're in one location. You can't move them. You can't get them out of the way. If they're going to be attacked, they're just going to be bombed. But with our air-based leg of the triad, they could be moved around. And also, since they're in the air, they're planes, they're people, they could be recalled. Say there's a crisis and the president decides that they want to bomb a country, but then the other country surrenders or changes their mind, they could be brought back to base. The mission can be canceled. The cruise missiles can be, I don't believe they could be disabled, but the bombers could be called back. And so, once again, this level of the triad has the advantages of forward deployment and then the ability to call off a strike. But their disadvantages is that they're very vulnerable. So of course they're planes. They're at an airfield that once again everyone knows where an airfield is, and so they're one of the top targets for a nuclear strike or just a normal strike in general. And so while they can be pretty flexible in how you use these nuclear weapons, they're going to be one of the biggest targets. And a plane can't take off from an airfield that's been reduced to nuclear rubble. So if your airbase is hit, that's about it. So yeah, that's the second leg of the nuclear triad. And so we get to the third, and arguably one of the most effective is our sea-based nuclear deterrence. So these are what we call submarine launched ballistic missiles. And the one that we currently have now is the Trident II submarine launched ballistic missile, pretty recent. I believe it came in service in the 90s. And so the United States has about 240 of these missiles held in ballistic missile submarines. We have 14 of them. And so each one of these submarines can hold at most 24 of these missiles. And on these missiles, you could have, actually I believe a NATO treaty prohibits it, but the maximum is about 5 warheads. So you take that 5 warheads per missile, 20 missiles per 20 missiles per submarine. Each missile has about 100 nuclear warheads on it. That's bigger than some countries' nuclear arsenals. And so right there with the submarine, you have the capability to move that submarine anywhere across the ocean. You can target any country that has a coast. You could sneak up to the borders of China and strike them in a moment's notice. You could sneak up to Russia and take out a bridge if you needed to. And so with the submarine leg, they are nearly undetectable. It's a submarine in the ocean, and naval warfare is very, very complicated. I don't even know sometimes. It's just, it is crazy. But submarines are nearly undetectable. They're extremely survivable. And as we said, they have so many missiles that they could do so much damage and then just return to the darkness. And they could be used, as I said, almost anywhere on the planet. And with this sea leg, there's not really any downsides, to be completely honest. They could be forwardly deployed, they could go on and be out there for months. I mean, these are on nuclear powered submarines, so there's not really a case where they need to go back to base every now and then or need to surface. So they could be out there for months, maybe years. And so with this leg, I'm going to go into a little later, I'm going to go into the advantages that these bring to nuclear strike options. But that about goes over each of the 3 legs of the nuclear triad that the United States has. And as I said, each one of these has their own advantages and their own disadvantages, but all of this adds in to how nuclear war would be fought and how the idea of deterrence would come to mind. Realize I've been talking for a while. Is there anything you'd like to add on, Khalil?
No, not necessarily about each one of those. I'd like to move on to the next question of what does nuclear war really look like? Because as a lot of us probably know by this point, nuclear war is essentially the extinction of the human race, or at least at the very least, the two nations engaged. This is what's largely known as mutually assured destruction. Coined in 1962, it's the theory that in a nuclear conflict, both sides would ensure such destruction that each other's nations would essentially be completely annihilated. So there is a moral question for the country that attacked first of whether or not they want to be the ones that sparked such annihilation. So that's where you get the idea of deterrence. You know, like you want to make the idea of going to war on a nuclear sense, like going to nuclear war, so terrible by not just having one nuke, that might kill a few 100,000 people. You want to have so many nukes that you would absolutely wipe out the other side. And it seems quite sadistic, but that is where the idea of deterrence comes from. So, yeah,
Yeah. If you know that you and your entire country and millions of your country, hundreds of millions of your countrymen are going to die in a war that could be started over literally anything, you're not really going to want to start a war. I mean, I wouldn't want to be responsible for 130 million Americans to die in hours. And so, if someone's going to threaten nuclear war, you kind of think twice about it. And so, this is where deterrence comes from. So with deterrence, what you need is a credible and a powerful nuclear armed services that is believable and strong enough to ensure that the other side will be destroyed, and so that the other side would believe that it's not worth it to, take up a conflict. As
right.
Khalil said, you can't just have one nuke and hope the other side isn't willing to risk one city. It has to
Yeah,
be a level where it's the whole country, it's everyone, and
you
maybe even
have
the
to
whole
make it.
world.
You have to make it a suicide pact,
Hmm.
for it to prevent war.
Yeah. And do you really want to sign your name onto that in millions of people? So yeah, like I said, you're gonna think twice. And so with deterrence comes into the ideas of back again how nuclear war will be fought. And so earlier I described the different legs of the triad that the United States and other countries have in different levels. Sometimes they emphasize others more than one, like air more than sea based, but they all have them to a certain extent. Um, so back to nuclear warfighting. So one of the concepts that comes into deterrence is the idea of first strike. So first strike is the ability to, I mean, you're going to be the first one launching the bombs. You're going to be the first one sending out the missiles. And what you're doing there is that you're hoping that theoretically you could destroy the other country's ability to wage war against your own country. So basically, you're sending your missiles out to go destroy their missile silos, or their air bases, or their command and control, like their Capitol building and their leaders. You're hoping that you could stop the enemy from basically fighting back and leading to millions of your people dying by taking out any of their any if not all of their military capability. You want them, like I said, they can't fight back. And so with that, you need a strong force that will be able to lead that first strike and not be taken out easily. And so that's where the ground based of the first strike capability comes in. You have those missiles that could be launched very quickly and will be used up by the time the enemy would be able to respond. And they get hit relatively quickly. I believe it's about 30 minutes between the launch of a Minuteman III missile to the time of impact. And I'm sure it would vary by trajectory and target, but that's roughly the case. When it comes to submarine launched ballistic missiles, it could be about 15 minutes, given to just a less trajectory. And then nowadays, when we come to ideas like hypersonic weapons, it could be even shorter. It could be 7 minutes. It could be 5 minutes. And so what you're doing there is you're hoping that you could take out the enemy's ability to fight against you so that you wouldn't have to worry about losing all your people, or at least losing as many as it could have been. So yeah.
Yeah, which is why the idea of the whole point, again, as Chad mentioned, the idea of a first strike is to make a second strike so hard. So essentially, if your command and control, if your silos, your air bases, your radar, missile defense sites, and bases for submarine and other capital naval ships are destroyed, it's going to be really hard to fight back. But on the off chance that it didn't work, you'd be able to somewhat reliably respond and ensure that your attacker is overwhelmingly punished or weakened. So, of course, this relies on, again, surviving the first strike. Um, but you can, in this opportunity, hit their nuclear storage facilities, air bases, and silos, command and control, and other big population centers in the enemy country. Because if they're going to attack you and kill hundreds of thousands or millions of people, then why not inflict as much damage on the enemy as possible? So
Hmm.
Um, yeah, today, the amount of nukes has gone down dramatically since the end of the Cold War because of somewhat eased tensions, but there's still a lot of them, because the top two countries in the world, the US and Russia, still have thousands of nuclear warheads. The US has around 3,700 with over 1,700 actively deployed as of now. Um, and with Russia, they have nearly 6,000. So they're still the number one as far as nukes. That's why it's really hard to know when Putin is bluffing or not. He uses nuclear blackmail like a lot of other Soviet leaders in the past. Which is why it's just so scary to work with him. That's why, you know, in the paper that I'm working on right now that I mentioned earlier, he probably is the most dangerous man in the world ever. Um, and again, there's 1,500 currently deployed on Russia's borders. Um, that and a lot of those nukes are stationed to fight or fight to to be to strike over towards NATO territory if they were to intervene too far in Ukraine.
Yeah. So both the countries, even now, have enough weapons to completely and overwhelmingly destroy the other. Um, should a war between the U.S. and the Russia go down and it go nuclear, 6,000, well, this is about 9,000 total nuclear weapons is beyond an overkill. I've heard stories around where some military experts estimate you really need about not even 1,000 nuclear weapons for an assured destruction of the enemy. It could really be about 500. And yet, as we said, US has 3,800, Russia has 6,000. Yeah, if a war is going to start and they pull out all the stops, there's no countries, there's not going to be a United States or Russia to begin with. And this is just imagining that nuclear war is isolated. There's fallout. There is nuclear debris and smoke and ash all over the planet at this point. Of course, with nuclear weapons, what happens is when you get that detonation, you get dust and clouds thrown up into the atmosphere, and those spread all across the planet. And so, even just a war between our two countries, all that smoke, all that radiation is going to spread all across the northern hemisphere. And um, another thing I don't think I even mentioned before is that they could cause nuclear winter. It could cause so much smoke that it leads to temperatures going down and you get a little ice age. I mean, we've all heard the stories. It's Armageddon. If it's not for the northern hemisphere, then it could be for the entire planet. Of food shortages, maybe even billions of deaths. It's terrible. And so having all of these, everyone everyone dies between the two fighters, really.
Which is why, as we were talking about with our neutrality series about a week and a half ago at this point, and then we mentioned again during our last limited series about the nukes in 1945. Leaders always have to judge, and balance, between like whether or not which either action will save the most amount of lives. It is the primary concern, especially in the nuclear era, of what action will save lives. So um, when it comes to that, like especially in the nuclear era, in the 50s and the 60s, the leaders of the world that had nukes realized that no action can justify what would come in a nuclear war. There is no other decision that would kill so many people. Because if you're going to attack, even with one or two nukes, you can expect the enemy to hit you with five or six.
Mm,
And then you will retaliate and may even throw your entire arsenal at them. So, um, no action that you can take can justify that. So that's where spying comes in, throughout the Cold War. That's where like covert operations start to come in, and
yeah,
also about like just preventing the human instinct for conflict. which is the major head of our next part of this discussion, which is it good that we have nukes? Maybe we don't need as much nukes as we have, but is it good that we have nukes so we can prevent that human instinct for conflict?
Hmm. Is it good enough that we potentially stopped world wars with these world-ending weapons, or is having them too risky? Could accidents lead to them being used? Is it just too much power for us to handle? And so these are kind of questions that we're going to be looking at our next couple of episodes. Um, because as time has gone on, we've learned a lot more about what exactly a nuclear war would mean. And even back then, we knew what it would look like. And so we uh, fortunately we haven't had a nuclear war happen. Of course, we wouldn't really be here, but we've had the chance to do estimates, and we've gotten dangerously close to pushing the button and seeing what a real one would look like. But fortunately, what we have been left instead of a nuclear wasteland of a planet, we have plans and we have stories and we have histories that we'd like to tell you about how close we've gotten, what this war would look like. And so we're able to question whether or not, having nukes has been a good idea or whether it's too much.
Right. So when on the world stage and world leaders are discussing what's the best option to get through some political crisis or catastrophe, like currently with Russia and Ukraine, or looking at or in comparison, looking at the 1945 crisis of whether or not the U.S. and its allies would invade Japan. You have an interesting comparison because I just want to be able to make this connection so people can understand the situation that was going on in 45 and compare it to today. The yields of the nukes then in the 40s were not nearly the yields that there are today. The U.S. first of all didn't have enough nukes in 1945 to end the world. Um, um, of course, the destruction of those two cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, led to a lot of people dying. We made the conclusion at the end of our section that the amount of lives that have been killed that have been killed so far as a result of those bombings and its aftermath um, are less lives by far than if we would have done anything else that would have led to the Japanese surrendering in 1945. Again, to hammer home the point, nothing, there is no justification for a single nuke being dropped today in this world. And that is a result of many other nations having bombs. It's because we have nukes that no one's ever going to use them, and that was
Hmm.
not the case in 1945.
Yeah. No one's going to use them, hopefully, and no one should use them because as we will, we'll demonstrate, we'll talk about it going forward. But using one leads to another being used into a completely escalation that does not need to happen, and of course, could lead to the end of the world. And so, having these weapons, having this possibility of not just your country but of the planet being destroyed has stopped so many people and world leaders in their minds from going forward with escalating different conflicts or pushing another leader's buttons anymore because these nuclear weapons exist, because it's the possibility that not just the enemy but yourself will die in this kind of exchange that has stopped things that uh, things that could have been so much worse. And as I said, we'll talk more, but
Right.
it I, it's worked.
Yeah, we never thought that we would get to a point technologically. I bet no one in the early 1900s during the slaughter of the World War One would think that the human race would get to the point where we technologically advance so far that we could end all life on Earth. But we have gotten to that point, and that has stopped us from making a lot of stupid decisions. there will never be another World War I. There will never be another World War II, and there will never be a World War III, at least hopefully. So we will continue our part 2 because we said we were going to stop at 30 minutes, and we should be getting really close to that point, maybe even a little bit past it. So yeah, that was an interesting part 1, and we'll continue on this series of nuclear deterrence, looking at a few more examples of crises and how world leaders have addressed the idea of nuclear deterrence. So without further ado, we are the Marshals of Truth, and we'll see you.
Yep. Have a good one.